What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Commissioner's Office podcast. My name is Daniel, and thank you all for tuning in wherever you're tuning in from, whether that's Apple or Spotify or YouTube or anywhere in the world where you're tuning in right now. Happy to have you because we have another great episode for you all today. Today, I am going to be revealing my NFL quarterback tier list for the upcoming season. Now, I know that, of course, the season is still a couple months away. We haven't even started training camp really yet, and obviously we haven't even gotten to the preseason yet. But I thought since most teams' QB situation is pretty solidified, that I think I could get away with revealing a quick tier list on which quarterbacks I think are the best in the NFL. If you missed last week's episode, it was great. We had my brother Zach on the podcast, the host of the Onside Kick Show, and we went through our top 10 head coaches in the NFL. There was a little bit of a disagreement, which I thought was pretty good. So if you haven't already, check that out. You can find it anywhere where you found this one. I do want to once again plug our YouTube channel. We have a YouTube channel now, the Commissioner's Office. You can look it up. All of the previous episodes are on there, including the one last week. So make sure to check that out. Also follow us on Instagram at the Commish Office. And you'll get to see all of the content that we put out for you. So, the QB tier list. If you're not watching this on YouTube, basically I have a tier list in front of me, and how it works is that in this case, there's 6 tiers in descending order based on the talent of the QB. So, I'll introduce the tiers. At the top, we have the best of the best. Pretty self-explanatory. Then we have the really good category. Then below that, we have the good category, the guys that are, might get the job done, but are they the franchise QBs? Probably not. Below that, we have the bridge QB. If people are unfamiliar with that term, it's basically short for a guy who, is just guiding your team through maybe a rebuild or waiting for a better team to come back from injury, possibly. That's basically what a bridge QB is. He's not the franchise guy, but he's more than just throwing anyone out there, basically. Below that, in the tier list, we have too early to tell. This is probably going to be reserved for a lot of the younger QBs because we had a lot of rookies this year. And then in the bottom is not the guy. So I understand this list is heavily subjective. And there may be some controversial opinions, but that's the fun of it, right? So, without further ado, let's get into this. So the first QB on here that the tier list has, I think this seems to just be in like alphabetical order, I guess. First one is Aaron Rodgers. Ooh, that's starting off pretty tough. Aaron Rodgers. So obviously he got his first year with the Jets last year. Pretty short-lived, brought the flag out in the tunnel and then tore his Achilles. He seems to be recovering pretty well from that injury. I think right now I'm putting him in the really good category. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers, future Hall of Fame quarterback, Super Bowl winner, MVP, whatever. But, we haven't seen him play in a long time. We really only saw him for just a couple plays in that first game with the Jets, and he's now 40 years old. So can he get back to that form that he had with the Packers? I'm sure he can, but will he? That's the more unknown part. But yeah, I think the Jets are really gearing up to have a really good team this year. They invested in the offensive line. They did lose Bryce Huff, but they traded for Hassan Reddick, so they should be in line to contend for that division, especially with the Bills not being as good, at least projected to not be as good this year. They really just have to compete with the Dolphins as the fourth team in that division is, look at my sign, the Patriots, who are rebuilding, of course. So yeah, Aaron Rodgers goes in the really good category. All right, next one. This is Aiden O'Connell, still on the Raiders. I think it's going to be his second year in the league. Let me check that. So yes, it will be his second year. He started 10 games for the Raiders last year in relief for Jimmy Garoppolo, who got hurt. I'm going to put him in the not the guy category. I think that Aiden O'Connell was not someone that the Raiders used a heavy amount of draft capital on. I mean, he was a 4th-round pick out of Purdue, and I didn't really see a lot that impressed me in that first year, and the Raiders honestly had a pretty good offense. You have Davante Adams. They just kind of stopped using Hunter Renfrow. You have Josh Jacobs, and I understand there was a lot of turmoil in that Raiders system. Of course, Antonio Pierce, now the interim coach, now the permanent head coach. So it's presumed that the Raiders are just going to roll with AOC, as they call him, but ultimately I don't really think he is the guy. I really thought the Raiders were going to make a push for Michael Penix in this year's draft. They ultimately couldn't take him because the Falcons shocked everyone, took him at 8, but I'm going to put Aiden O'Connell not the guy right now. All right, next one, Anthony Richardson. This is tough because Anthony Richardson has a lot of potential. I'm not going to say he's not the guy because he only played a handful of games last year and he was really good. He's not a bridge QB either, but is he, would I call him good, really good, or the best of the best? Probably not. So I'm still going to say too early to tell. I almost put him in the good category. But the fact is, I mean, Anthony Richardson was taken 4th overall. Everybody thought this is one of the most raw QB prospects we've seen in a long time. He barely played at Florida, and really it was the physical attributes that were, increasing his draft stock. But in those first couple games with Indianapolis, it was not just his physicality and athleticism that was impressing people. It was just the fact that he looked pretty poised and wasn't really making as many mistakes as people thought he was going to. I mean, he had 3 touchdowns, 1 interception in only basically 4 games started. But in those 4 games, he was pretty good. He rushed for 4 touchdowns, did fumble 3 times. But again, I think the Colts, they've had a very solid management in the past probably 7 years or so, ever since Andrew Luck's career kind of faded. So I think that it's still too early to tell with AR. I mean, he's only going to be in his 2nd season. It's hard to believe. But yeah, too early to tell for Anthony Richardson. But I'm really excited to see what he can do coming back from injury. Next one, Baker Mayfield. Boy, what a controversial player he's been basically his whole career. I think he's between good and really good. I would say he's in closer to the good category. That might change. I mean, he got rewarded this year. Everybody kind of thought, his career might be fizzling out. He signed with Tampa Bay on a 1-year deal. I thought that was a great situation for him because, I mean, again, talking about a guy who was the number 1 overall draft pick, he's shown flashes of being a great player, but just ultimately kind of fell out of favor in Cleveland. But then in Tampa Bay, he put up a fantastic season there. Won a playoff game, gave Detroit a pretty good scare in that divisional round. I used to not be a big fan of Baker Mayfield. I just thought that he didn't quite have the professionalism needed to be a good quarterback. But in his time in the league, he's really matured. And I think Tampa Bay I think he's pretty close to a franchise quarterback. I don't know how long he's going to last in Tampa Bay. Obviously, their Super Bowl core is kind of aging with Mike Evans coming back for another year, Chris Godwin being re-signed. But a lot of those guys are, I feel like, maybe closer to the tail end of their career than the start. Doesn't mean they can't compete anymore, but he signed I think it was a 3-year deal in the offseason. I think that, you could make the argument that he's in that same tier as Aaron Rodgers. I think the only reason why he's not in the really good category is because the only person right there is a future Hall of Famer. So right now I'll put him in good category, but I think that the Buccaneers could definitely turn some heads. I think they should win that division. I know the Falcons are lurking with Kirk Cousins, but with the Saints kind of underperforming year after year and the Panthers still in the middle of a rebuild, I think this is Tampa Bay's division. Look at his numbers from last year. He had over 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, only just 10 interceptions. It's a pretty pretty good year for a guy who's in his first year in that system. Did make a Pro Bowl that year. And so, we think of Mayfield as a veteran of the league. He's still in his 20s. He's still 29, just turned 29. So I would put him in the good category. I think he's got a pretty bright future if he can stay healthy in Tampa. All right, Bo Nix, another one of the rookies. Actually, this is the first one of the rookies from this year. Upcoming rookies, I should say. Did go to the Broncos, I believe, at pick 11. I think I actually did mock him to the Broncos. I thought he was going to go in the top 10. He fell to 11, but the Broncos still took him. It's got to be too early to tell, right? There's probably a lot of people out there that are going to say he's not the guy, but I would say you can't label anyone that until they step on the field. Bo Nix had really good numbers in college. Obviously he was more of a short yardage guy, but in that Oregon offense, that's kind of how they wanted him to be used. And really the biggest knock on him is that he's just on the older side. I think he's 23 or 24. The joke was that he's been playing college football for like 10 years now. So I think it's too early to tell. I think the Broncos team is just not in the best place. I really don't know how long Sean Payton is going to last there. I still think they have good pieces on offense. They still have Cortland Sutton. And they still have a pretty decent offensive line too. But again, I'm not really super hopeful for the outlook of the Broncos this year, but I think that we can't label Bo Nix as super unworthy of being a starter before he even steps on the field. So right now he's in the too early to tell category. All right, Brock Purdy. Very controversial player. Some people think he's a system QB. Some people think he is a great one. And this is probably going to make some people mad, but I'm putting him in the best of the best. I'm sorry, but this guy was Mr. Irrelevant, and then he took them to a Super Bowl. You can't really argue with the numbers. He's put up really good stats this year, or last year, I should say. And I just feel like, you know what? Sure, Kyle Shanahan has built a great system that multiple QBs can be successful in, but that should not really take away from the fact that these QBs have also been good players. So if you put Brock Purdy in a different uniform, is he as good? Maybe not, but that's not the reality we're living in, are we? And obviously the big knock is Brock Purdy didn't get the job done in the Super Bowl. It's hard to beat Mahomes. What can we say? The only person who has beat him in the Super Bowl is Tom Brady. So I think for the Niners, their window is only getting smaller, so they really need to get it done this year. But, I'm not going to pretend and say that Brock Purdy has the toughest job in the NFL. He has a great roster. He has a great group of coaches, but it shouldn't take away from the fact that he's a fantastic player. He's got great accuracy. He's got great awareness in the pocket, very calm. I think that, he was contending for the MVP last year. I think he could win it this year if he continues to play well. So I think he's in the best of the best category. Moving on, Bryce Young. It's too early to tell. I really don't think people should jump off the wagon for this guy yet. He was the number 1 overall pick, and he had nothing in that first year at the Panthers. A first-year head coach who they fired. Sure, he had a couple weapons on offense. He had Adam Thielen, who played pretty well last year. He had Miles Sanders, who did not play well last year. And we need to stop writing off QBs so quickly. People are starting to write off Bryce Young, even though he's only had 1 year in the NFL. Let's see how he does this year. The Panthers put a lot of money into this team. Another new head coach, an offensive-minded one in Dave Canales. But I think we have to remember what made Bryce Young the number 1 overall pick. For a guy his size, pretty small for a QB, he's got a rocket arm. Has great mobility, great vision of the field. He has these rare attributes that a lot of QBs didn't have coming out of college. And so I think we can't close the book on Bryce Young just yet. But that Panther system, man, they have to clean it up. Just so much turmoil over the years, and David Tepper is not helping things with him being kind of throwing tantrums at the game and being mean to fans. They need to really take a chill pill. That's the informal way of saying that. So yeah, he's in the too early to tell category. So now CJ Stroud. I mean, how about that rookie year? Fantastic rookie year in a class that was expected to be outperformed by Bryce Young. He went second overall. Amazing rise, and just, man, what a job by the Texans organization. I'm not ready to put him in best of the best yet. He's in really good, I would say, along with A-Rod. Stroud just kind of shocked everyone this year. He plays so maturely as a QB, considering he's still pretty young, and man, he can sling it. And obviously the Texans are developing a pretty good offense over there. Nico Collins and Tank Dell have emerged as, really good weapons on offense. Now they brought in Stephon Diggs. So, this division is theirs for the taking. Obviously the Jaguars and the Titans and Colts, they're all kind of similar in terms of talent and where they are, but I think that you're looking at a future MVP right here in CJ Stroud. I think if he continues to play well and he can just stay healthy, sky's the limit for this Texans team, because they won a playoff game with a rookie quarterback. I mean, how rare is that? And so that takes us to the second rookie, and probably my favorite one, Caleb Williams. Oh boy, where's he going here? I probably should put him in the too early to tell category, but I'm trying to resist putting him in the already good category. And I'll do that, I would say. I think that, again, if you listen to some of my older episodes when the Bears were still playing last year, I was not necessarily a fan of the idea of taking Caleb Williams number 1 overall. That does not mean that I didn't like him as a player. He's a magician on the field, as we saw in his couple seasons at USC. My beef was more with evaluating him versus the current situation that the Bears had and the larger, makeup of the team. But now that that's all over and Fields is no longer on the Bears and we now have Caleb Williams instead, I'm really excited, and I'm trying not to get my hopes up, because we have another rookie QB, and rookie QBs are historically not very good unless you're someone like CJ Stroud or someone like Justin Herbert. But I can't help but be excited, man. I mean, this is the most hype that the Bears have had in a really long time, and I do think he's going to be a good player. Knock on wood. So he probably should be in the too early to tell category, but that would make this episode kind of boring, wouldn't it? So, if he can play up to the sky high potential he has, I think one day he'll be in this category, the best of the best. But obviously right now hasn't played a single down in the NFL. I'll just put him in good for now. Okay, Dak Prescott. This is a tough one, because I was looking at his stats before I started recording. He's been really solid in his career. I think he's in these top 2 categories. I'll put him in the really good category, because I just think that there are better QBs in the NFL. I don't think he's a top 5 QB in my opinion. I guess we'll see how this tier list turns out. But I mean, he played like an MVP last year. You could argue that he should have been the MVP, but the big knock on him is he just can't get the job done in the postseason. And I think that there is some valid criticism on that front. The Cowboys have had good team after good team after good team, and they just continue to get underperformed. They should not have lost to the Packers last year on paper, but I feel like everyone just kind of knew that was going to happen, and it did. And it was a bad loss at home. But, regardless, if you're looking at the numbers, I think Dak Prescott is a really good player. And yes, he's had a good team his entire career, but still, the numbers that he's put up are pretty incredible when you look at them. I mean, last year, 36 touchdowns, 9 interceptions on 4,500 yards. He was second in MVP voting, and he earned a Pro Bowl. I mean, that's I don't really know how you can look at that and say, well, he's still not a good QB. You can say that whatever, he's not good in the playoffs. That's fine, but the talent is there. It's just the playoff performance, I think, is really keeping him from that top tier. So right now he's in the really good category. Next one, Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones. Much maligned quarterback for the New York Giants. I'm putting him in the not the guy category. Honestly, I think you could make the argument for bridge QB. After this year, I don't think you could say he's in the good category anymore. His year in 2022 was phenomenal. He rushed for like 800 yards. He rarely gave up any turnovers. Again, he was just kind of doing what he needed to do. He was kind of a game manager for the Giants in that really good season that they had. But at this point in his career, I just don't see the Giants going anywhere with him. And I'm going to make the same argument. Well, I mean, I know this is cliche, but it's a quarterback-driven league, and there's just only so far you're going to get with Daniel Jones. And I don't want to hear if you put Daniel Jones in the 49ers system. No, I'm not. There is a different tier of player between someone like Brock Purdy and someone like Daniel Jones. I just don't think that Daniel Jones has consistently showed that he can be a good enough passer to be a starting successful quarterback. Is he trash? No, I don't think he's trash. Obviously he's won a playoff game with the Giants. That's more than a lot of quarterbacks can say. But I don't think he's the guy. I think that this Giants team is not really looking super good this year. So I would expect that after this year, he's probably gone. I thought that they might take J.J. McCarthy this year in the draft. They didn't. They got a great wide receiver in Malik Nabers instead, and that's fine. But I don't really see Daniel Jones being on the team for that much longer. And so here's Derek Carr now, the next one. Still with the Saints, still signed that big deal a couple years ago. I'm putting him in the bridge QB category. And I know what you're thinking. The Saints don't have a quarterback on the other end of that bridge. But they're going to at some point because, the Saints on paper have had a really good team for so long. And last year, it should have come together. It really should have. With Michael Thomas returning, you got Chris Olave, you got your quarterback in Derek Carr, but it just didn't happen. I don't think Derek Carr is the same player that he was with the Raiders a lot. I don't think he's a bad quarterback anymore. I think he's probably still starting quality, but again, the definition of a bridge. I think ultimately the Saints will probably move on once they can get out of his contract or once his contract finishes up. You look at his age right now, he's 33, and his numbers last year were not terrible. 25 touchdowns, 8 picks, less than 4,000 yards. He started all 17 games, but that was a battered 17 games. I mean, he got banged up in pretty much every single game. I respect Derek Carr as a player, but I don't ultimately think at this point in his career I would put him in these top 3 categories. Now this is going to be a tough one. Deshaun Watson. Yeah, obviously all the off the field issues, and then he just didn't really play well with the Browns. Then he got hurt. I'm gonna I'll put him in the not the guy category because I just don't think he's shown anything on the Browns to merit being a long-term starter. I know that he's still not super old, but again, with that contract, it's just the way things are going. I just don't really see. I mean, he signed a fully guaranteed contract. So unless that contract is voided in basically some special way, like he doesn't necessarily have to play super well. He's still got his money, and he got outplayed by Joe Flacco. He got benched for Joe Flacco. Like I'm not saying that the Browns should get rid of him because frankly, they don't really have any way to without paying a ton of money. I think they just have to ride it out for as long as they can. But at this point, Deshaun Watson has not shown me anything that suggests that he is going to be a good starter going forward. Okay, next one, Drake Maye. Too early to tell, I would say. Pretty obvious. He's a rookie. I really liked him coming out of North Carolina. I thought that the comp between him and Josh Allen or Justin Herbert was pretty close to the point where it was kind of scary. He really did look like a fuse between those two QBs. But I think he's walking into a tough situation with the Patriots. I mean, yes, the Patriots have, they are the Patriots. They've been so good for so long, but no Bill Belichick, a new head coach who's defensive-minded in Jerod Mayo, and really just not a lot of other pieces on that team. I mean, he's going to be competing for that job with Jacoby Brissett. I think Maye will probably end up starting, even if that's not the smartest decision. But again, we've seen good QBs walk into bad situations and, more or less come out pretty well. Joe Burrow comes to mind. Kind of a rough rookie season. But then obviously he was able to take the Bengals to a Super Bowl. So we'll see. I think Maye has a lot of potential as well. A lot of good QBs in this year's draft. Next one, Gardner Minshew. This is a tough one. Gardner Minshew, obviously now on the Raiders, so he probably should start over Aiden O'Connell. I'll put him in the bridge category. Gardner Minshew actually was pretty good last year in relief of Anthony Richardson. He made a Pro Bowl, which sounds crazy, but if you look at his Football Reference page, there's the Pro Bowl last year, and these numbers aren't crazy. 3,300 yards, 15 touchdowns, 9 picks. I mean, it's nothing insane, but in terms of AV, it's just as valuable as his rookie season with Jacksonville. So Gardner Minshew is not a bad QB. He's a good backup to a decent starter, but again, I don't really think he's the long-term option with the Raiders. But again, they're going to have a pretty good offense this year because they have Brock Bowers now, who is a dog at tight end. They still have Devontae Adams as well. So we'll see, but that's a tough division they're going up against. All right, Geno Smith now. We've really filled out these last couple columns of the tier list, and I'll put Geno Smith in the good category. I feel a little weird about doing this because I really don't know if he actually is on the tier of Baker Mayfield and hopefully Caleb Williams. But again, last year, Geno Smith was great with the Seahawks, and so he signed that contract to be their long-term starter, and it just didn't really come together. The Seahawks had to deal with a lot of injuries. Drew Lock ended up stepping in for Seattle. But I don't want to call him a bridge QB because I still feel like they can win, but I think that the window is really close to closing. You don't really know how long that offense is going to stay together with Metcalf and Lockett and Kenneth Walker. And the defense was really good a couple years ago. It was not as good this year. Maybe with Mike McDonald coming in, he can straighten things out. But I'll put him in the good category. Next one, Jacoby Brissett. Going to be fighting for that job with Drake Maye. I would say bridge QB. I mean, basically you can say bridge QB or not the guy. Jacoby Brissett, another one of those kind of career backups, played pretty decently in Indiana. Obviously got his start in New England. So coming back home for another year where he may or may not be the starter. I think the Patriots would probably be wise to start Brissett, at least for the start of the year, just to see how he ends up doing, because you also want to preserve Maye while you're really not contending super competitively, in my opinion. But yeah, I think pretty obvious bridge QB. All right, Jalen Hurts. The Eagles, always very controversial. Are they actually good? Is Jalen Hurts actually good, or is he benefiting from, a broken play in the tush push? I don't believe it. I think he's best of the best. I mean, he was second in MVP voting in 2022 to Patrick Mahomes, I believe, who won that year. And yes, he was not as good this season. And that Eagles team, although their record was pretty solid in the first half of the year, they were a little bit off in some way. But I still think Jalen Hurts is a really good QB, and I know he has a lot of help on offense in Philadelphia, but his connection with these receivers, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, I think is one of the strongest in the NFL, and I think that he's due for a really, really good season this year because I think the Eagles have something to prove again. And I know that he doesn't throw for a ton of yards. I mean, again, 22 touchdowns on 3,700 yards last year, 23 touchdowns on 3,800 yards this year. But, I mean, when you look at AV, 20 and 18, still pretty valuable. So, his runner-up MVP year was only 2 points better than his year in 2023. And I know AV is not the greatest stat ever, but it's to make the point that maybe his numbers weren't as poor as people remember. And also, you look at his rushing stats, 15 touchdowns last year, 13 and 22, 10 and 21. I know a lot of them are on QB sneaks, but 41 rushing touchdowns as a quarterback in your first 4 years in the NFL is pretty good regardless of how you get it. So I still think he's definitely a top 10 QB in the NFL. He's probably a top 5 QB as well. All right, Jared Goff up next. Really good category, I would say. Of course, the number 1 overall pick, he started off badly with the Rams. People thought this was the next big bust in the NFL, but he really picked himself up, and Jared Goff has just been solid with the Lions. He's been put in an offense that has a ton of weapons, but he's played really well, and I think that he has proved in the postseason that he can win. I mean, he's made a Super Bowl. He's made an NFC Championship game. I think that the Lions really were just kind of one step away from getting to that Super Bowl, and he just signed a big deal in the offseason. Detroit is handing out bags everywhere. Everybody's getting paid on the Lions right now, and I feel okay putting him in this category. I know it's a little weird. You got Aaron Rodgers, CJ Stroud, Dak Prescott, and then Jared Goff. It seems kind of like one of these things is not like the other type thing, but I think at this point in all of their careers, I think this makes sense because Jared Goff has been really, really good with Detroit. He always plays really badly against the Bears, so hopefully that happens again next year. But I think that he's established himself as a borderline top 10 QB in the NFL. All right, next one, Jayden Daniels, the 2nd overall pick. I'm saying too early to tell. Again, nothing against Jayden Daniels. Heisman winner, great player, fantastic player. You talk about a guy who can do basically the dual threat thing at a premium, at a really competitive school like LSU, putting up 40 passing touchdowns, I believe, and then rushing for 1,000 yards in your last campaign there. I mean, that's pretty insane. So we'll see how he does in this Commanders team that they surprisingly spent a lot of money, and they have weapons on offense. They have Austin Eckler. They have Terry McLaurin, a new head coach in Dan Quinn, who has a good amount of experience. So it will be interesting, but I do think that he has a lot of potential, and I think he'll be pretty good. J.J. McCarthy as well, I'm putting him in the too early to tell category. If you don't really know my thoughts on McCarthy, or all of these QBs really that just were drafted, take a look at the mock draft episode. I think I go into them in more depth. I think McCarthy is walking into a pretty solid situation. He's got a good receiving core. He's got a head coach who was a former quarterback in Kevin O'Connell. Ultimately, I don't think the Lions, or the Vikings, I should say, will be that good this season, but it's too early to tell. I'm not a McCarthy hater. I think that he could be good, but he's pretty unproven. All right, Joey B, Joe Burrow. This is a tough one because as much as I love Joe Burrow just as, his presence and has a really funny personality and is overall very fun to watch compete, I think he's a touch overrated. And I know that that's probably controversial, but I don't really think he's the top 3 guy that people kind of say he is. He's right up there with Mahomes and Josh Allen. I just don't really think that's true. I'll put him in the top category for now, but he's kind of in between here. To me, I mean, Dak Prescott has better career numbers. Joe Burrow just has a Super Bowl run. That's basically it. And I know injuries have killed him, but like, when is it going to be injuries are holding you back versus injuries have, kind of defined your career, And I know that you can't count an injury against a player, but when a guy has only played so long in the NFL, at a healthy position, I'm going to be hesitant to declare him or to continue to declare him a consistent top 5, top 3 quarterback. I'll put him in this top category right now, but I would take these 2 quarterbacks, I think, over him in their current situations. I think Joe Burrow at his peak is better than Brock Purdy for sure, but again, that Cincinnati team just was not very good last year, even when Burrow was playing. So they definitely have a lot to prove this year. All right, Jordan Love, as much as it pains me to do this, he's definitely in the good category. You can make an argument he's in the really good category. We've only seen 1 year of him, though. That's the thing. You could also say he's in the too early to tell category, but that year he put together this year was really, really good. It was pretty scary watching him because he has the way that he throws the ball and the way he stands in the pocket is very similar to this guy right here, Aaron Rodgers. That Green Bay team was so young. Basically, all of his receivers were rookies or second-year players. He did a great job. Won a playoff game, too, against a formidable Cowboys squad. And so, we'll see what the Packers do this year. They definitely could make a push for that division. I think that the North this year is going to be a dogfight with the Lions, the Bears, and the Packers. Hopefully the Bears do well, but especially the Lions and Packers. And the Vikings, they'll probably get some random win over the Lions this year because that's what the Vikings do. So Jordan Love's in the good category. Very scary watching him. I get like a flashback every time. All right, Josh Allen, best of the best. I think that, we talked about this kind of last week with Zach on the show. He really is the modern Brett Favre. He will throw interceptions. He will have games where he throws 5 touchdowns, but he throws 3 picks as well, or he fumbles the ball. But the fact is, when he is on, he is impossible to stop, and he always does play well in the playoffs as well. So I think that this is going to be the toughest year probably for him since, he got into the NFL for the Bills because they don't have Stephon Diggs anymore. That core is kind of starting to erode. But what I've consistently said for as long as I've had this podcast is what makes QBs truly great is when they can lift up everyone around them, when they can take a random receiving core that is not as talented as people think and make them great players. That's what makes a Hall of Fame Super Bowl winning QB. So I'm excited to see what Josh Allen does this year. Okay, Justin Fields. This is a tough one. I'm a big Fields defender. I'm not going to say he's not the guy. I'm not going to say he's too early to tell. As much as I think he belongs in this good category, I'll put him in the bridge QB category just because he's kind of flatline. I think that, I feel like I've analyzed his game so often on the show, but again, he has so much talent, especially in the rushing game, and I think he's a great passer, or he can be, but just wasn't meant to be in Chicago. And I could probably make 5 podcast episodes just talking about how many layers there were to, why he didn't succeed. Oh, it was because of him. It was because of the organization. It was because of the coach. It was yada, yada, yada. It didn't work out in Chicago. He's going to a new situation in Pittsburgh where he is fighting for that job with Russell Wilson. No one has been said they're the starter. Wilson knows that he's fighting with Fields. And Justin very well could start and very well could succeed, in my opinion. I still think he's got a lot of potential. He's still only 25 years old, but we'll see. But Mike Tomlin, if you're watching this, because you definitely are, please don't make him return kicks this year. Don't do that. All right, Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert. Talent is always there with this guy. He really hasn't gotten it done in the playoffs. It's probably going to make people mad, but I think he's in the best of the best. Honestly, I think that you give Justin Herbert an actually good Chargers team and 17 games starting, and your head coach is not Brandon Staley, and they win that division, I think. I mean, I don't know if they clear Mahomes in the playoffs. That's a different conversation, but the amount of... You know how hard it is to play for the Chargers? Like a team that doesn't have the Super Bowl, a team that has had a history of just wasting the talent of great players. And he is like the next in line to do this at the most important position. And the pressure is only going to get worse because his head coach is now Jim Harbaugh, and his team is demonstrably worse than last year. They don't have the weapons they do. They don't have Keenan Allen. They're relying on a rookie or a second-year wide receiver, Quentin Johnston, who has all this pressure because he underperformed last year. But man, Justin Herbert just gets the job done. How many Joshua Palmer deep balls do I have to see before people start to recognize this guy as maybe a top 5 QB in the NFL? I know he didn't play a ton last year because he got hurt, but the amount of injuries he's had to play through, the amount of bad offensive lines he's had, I think that he gets too much hate. I feel comfortable with putting up Herbert with the likes of Allen and Burrow and Hurts. Kirk Cousins. I'll put him in the good category. I think at times he's in the really good category. But, you kind of know what you're going to get with Captain Kirk. A good player, a guy who can get you to the playoffs, but he's not really proven in the playoffs. In many ways, he's comparable to Dak Prescott. I think Dak probably has higher highs than Kirk does, but Kirk might be a little more consistent and has probably played with less talent. I'm really interested to see what he does with the Falcons, though, because he is 33 or 34, I believe, coming off a major injury, and he got a ton of money. So I don't know what's going to happen, but that Falcons team should be good because they have a lot of talent, especially on offense. Now they have a new head coach in Raheem Morris, so we'll see. But that division, I think they could make a play for it. I know I said the Bucs should win it, but I think the Falcons could win it as well. Kyler Murray, just such a sad story. So many injuries, so many terrible Cardinals teams that he's just been thrown into. I'll put him in the good category. I don't think he's a bridge quarterback. I don't think he's not the guy, though. I mean, he's only 26, and oftentimes he was capable of holding up those Cardinals teams that were really not that good. I mean, last year when we played the Cardinals, I was at that game. It was Christmas Eve, and that Cardinals team, their best offensive player outside Kyler Murray was like Greg Dortch and James Conner. The Cardinals have really just not fielded great teams in the last couple years, and if their offense was good, their defense was bad, and vice versa. I think it's too early to say that Kyler Murray is not a good player. I mean, he's made the playoffs. He's played well before. But they really need to start building something in Arizona, and I think they are. I like the direction that the new regime is taking. They traded down and they traded up for Paris Johnson last year. Now they have Marvin Harrison. This is really starting to look like a Cardinals team that could go somewhere in the couple years. I think if Kyler gets hurt this year or doesn't play well, maybe we start to move him down. But right now, I still think that he could get back to that form that he had a couple years ago. All right, Lamar Jackson, best of the best. You can't compete with two MVPs. I mean, well, you can, but you can't say he's trash and ignore two MVP awards. This was probably the best shot the Ravens, I think, had yet with Lamar last year. They came up short. They really should have won that game. They held the Chiefs' offense down for most of it. But again, there really is no one like Lamar Jackson in the NFL. I think this year he solidified that he can pass the ball when he wants to. And he's not just a running quarterback. He's not a running back, That's been his whole theme, but I think last year he really showed like, no, I can be a pocket passer when I need to be. And so I think he's a top 5 QB in the NFL easily. I think you could argue that he's top 3. All right, Matthew Stafford. I'm going to put him in the bridge QB category for now because I think that the end is near for Stafford. You know, he played actually pretty well last year. I was surprised to see that he actually didn't throw as many picks as I thought he did. Got the Rams to the playoffs, but at this current stage of his career and the Rams team as a whole, I just don't really see them contending again. But I think he is a Hall of Famer. I do think that. You could argue that he's in the good category as well, but I wouldn't really put him on that same tier. So I'll put him in the bridge QB. Patrick Mahomes. This is hard. Best of the best. Not much of an explanation needed, really. 3 Super Bowls before the age of 30. That's pretty good. Russell Wilson. I will also put him in the bridge QB category. Again, I really do think he's capable of, a really good type season, but we just haven't seen a lot of him since he went to the Broncos and now is on the Steelers. He's got something to prove. So obviously he has less to prove than the people in this category, but if he wins that job, he's got weapons. He's got George Pickens. He's got Pat Freiermuth. He's got Jalen Warren. The Steelers are building a solid offense. So whoever wins this job for the Steelers shouldn't have a lot of excuse to do well. Sam Darnold on the Vikings now, pretty easily bridge QB. I think Darnold is a capable backup. People forget that he was the 3rd overall pick. He had a lot of potential when he came out in 2018, but on the Vikings, I think he should be starting over McCarthy. We'll see if he actually does, but this season's probably going to be kind of a wash for Minnesota unless McCarthy starts and proves something, but I don't see them going super far with Darnold, but he's a serviceable player. Trevor Lawrence, good category. Just signed the big deal a couple days ago. He still needs to prove it, I think. He hasn't played as well as a number 1 pick should, but the Jags are believing in him, which I was a little surprised that they signed him this quickly. And, he's taken him to the playoffs. He's gotten him a playoff win before, but we need to see more. Tua Tagovailoa, I'm going to put in that same category too. Tua is pretty solid in the regular season, but in the playoffs, again, he just hasn't really been there. And I know that playoff game versus the Chiefs last year was an outlier. It was super cold. And again, we talked about this last week with Zach, but you got to get it done, man. Like, that's at the end of the day, you have to be able to win, especially at the quarterback position. That's where everyone's looking. I think you have to be able to win. And Tua just has not been able to do that in the playoffs. All right, last one. It's been a long episode. Will Levis. I'm going to say too early to tell. He's not a bridge QB. He's not good or really good yet. I did like what I saw out of Will Levis last year. I think that he had his moments where he was like, wow, he's actually playing a lot better than people expected. But again, he really didn't start that much. I mean, Ryan Tannehill went down pretty early, probably halfway through the season. Let me look that up. Levis played 9 games. He started all 9. So yeah, he only really had half a season. That Titans offense was kind of a work in progress. Obviously, they did have Hopkins. Derrick Henry kind of was battling through injuries. They also had Tyjae Spears as well, who was good. I do think Levis has a lot of potential. I mean, people forget that he could have gone in the top 7 of the draft a couple years ago. I think I mocked him at 7 or 8. I think I had him going to the Raiders that year. He fell to the second round. Titans got pretty good value for him. And so we will see. I think the Titans are still kind of going into a rebuild. No Mike Vrabel. They have Brian Callahan now. I think that Levis still has a lot to prove, but with a season in a new system, this could be pretty key. I think we could find out very quickly if Levis is the guy or not. All right, so there you go. Take your screenshots if you're on YouTube. This was my QB tier list going into the season. Obviously, still a long way to go, but I thought this was pretty fun just to see where I mapped out everyone on the list. So we've reached the end of the episode. Thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you like hearing my opinions on this kind of stuff, check out our page. You can find me on Spotify or Apple, or check out the other episodes on YouTube. Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well. I'm trying to get a couple of reels per episode up so you guys can see some of that short form content. So once again, thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time.